Hi, my name is Nijea, and my topic is on Eurocentrism and how it skews learning in schools in the favor of white students. So the three main points I'm going to be talking about is how the abuse of people of color goes largely ignored in schools, the technological advances that certain people of color have made never even gets discussed, and the fact that some students actually are forced to leave their culture outside when they enter in schools. So for anyone who doesn't know, Eurocentrism is the focus on European culture and history while ignoring basically the outside, everything else. So for my first point, the historical abuse of people of color, we are told about Christopher Columbus and how in 1492 he sailed the ocean blue and discovered America, but really he landed in the Bahamas, and the people he met there were completely friendly, they were willing to trade, and he returned this kindness with nothing but abuse. And he met the, I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, but the Taino people, and he wrote in his diary that they do not know of arms or carry them, they should make good servants. And so they then enslaved these people, treated them brutally by either killing them or cutting off limbs if they did not deliver enough gold. And with the mixture of this brutal treatment and the diseases that were brought by the European people, this entire this culture was wiped out within decades. And then we're told about Winston Churchill, who in World War II helped take down Hitler, but what we are never told is that during this time, India was going through one of their worst famines ever, and Churchill decided to divert food that was supposed to be in India to the British troops, and you're probably thinking, well, the British troops needed it. British troops were completely fine. In fact, most of the food went into a stockpile in Europe, and because the food was no longer in India, it led to over 3 million deaths that could have easily been avoided. My second point is that major innovations by people of color completely left out of the history books. So we're told that the Wright brothers, they invented the airplane. Da Vinci came up with designs for flying machines. But over 600 years before Da Vinci, a man named Abbas bin Firnas, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, he actually created a flying device that was able to glide for what some reports say 10 minutes, but we're never even told about that, and that's 600 years before Da Vinci. And then vaccination was actually introduced into America by a slave named, I'm gonna say it wrong again, but Onipus, sorry if I said that wrong. He was a slave brought to America from Africa, and he told his master about how in Africa, for centuries, they've been getting the skin cells from a person who's infected with something like smallpox and putting it into someone who's not infected, and this essentially gave the person a form of immunity to the disease, so this is actually the first instance of vaccination. And then my final point, that minority students are forced to leave their culture outside of schools once they enter. In 1968, Latino students in East LA were completely forbidden from speaking Spanish. They were taught curriculum that just ignored Mexican American history, and they were basically told, go into manual labor. Don't take these college courses, you're not gonna need to do that. And you probably think that, well, that was the 60s. In 2013, a principal at Hempstead, Texas, told her students, you may not speak Spanish in school. And in 2016, Jennifer Kruger, a third grade English learners teacher, told her students they may not speak Spanish in the classroom, and if they did, they would be punished. And she told her students that if they told their parents about what she said, there would be retribution for that. And finally, Native American students who were in off-reservation schools in 1879, they completely had their culture ripped from them. Richard Henry Pratt attempted to kill the Indian and save the man by assimilating these children into white culture. Any symbols of their tribe that the children brought with them were completely removed. The boys who had long hair and braids had it completely cut, and they were given white names because they believed that would allow them to inherit land. And any traditional native foods were completely banned, and they were forced to basically adapt into white food at the time. And these children were also forbidden from speaking their native languages, and many schools resorted to punishment if the students spoken language at all. So, in conclusion, because we ignore historical abuses of people of color, because we ignore their technological advances, and because at times we will try to strip a person of color's culture from them, it skews basically school and the learning process towards white people. That's it.
Thank you.
They just got like a bunch of awards or something.
All right, well, the strongest part of the presentation is the organization. There's a clear structure in the preview, and in the body of the speech, you signpost the individual points as you go through it. You do exactly the same thing that I was just yelling at Felix about with your proposition. Stick that word how in front of it and turn it into an informative presentation instead of making it a declarative statement. So that's a little bit problematic. Although I know what the argument is that you're presenting here, but you want to make sure that everybody knows that sort of thing. The evidence is the thing that's, I think, the most problematic because we get kind of cryptic references to a few things. We did get a quote from Columbus. I think that that's pretty good. Then there's a whole bunch of information about what Columbus did that I'm sure that you have a source citation for, but you did not provide that source citation. I think that's a little bit problematic. The Churchill illustration, there's no data on at all. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. In fact, I'm sure that there are issues that went on there, but you don't cite any source on it. So, as far as I can tell, there's not any research that's been developed to support this particular point, and that's problematic. The idea that certain kinds of abuses by the dominant culture have been ignored, I don't think that that's all that controversial. I think most people recognize that those sorts of things definitely have happened. I'm not sure you've got the best examples here, and I think there are probably some that would be more convincing to people. On the second point, this seems to be an argument that says that people are not educated about the contributions of people of color, and you've got a couple of examples of things that people may or may not know. I don't know what is going on in the curriculum in high school science classes, whether or not they are teaching the history of aeronautics, or if they talk about vaccines and where they came from. I think that would be one of those things that would be helpful if you had some data that suggested that. For example, are there history teachers that have criticized this? Are there curriculum that exclude that? You don't cite any of those particulars. You just have a couple of examples of people that you say have been ignored, but I have no idea that they've been ignored, and or that they continue to be ignored. I certainly don't doubt that they were once ignored. The question is, do they continue to be ignored, and is that a substantial portion of the record? I think you need to have more examples, and you need some sources to go along with that. On the third point, on the third point, I think this is a little bit more problematic because you don't have source citations except for there's a reference to a specific incidence with the Indian culture, the American Indian culture, the Native American culture, and how they were brought into the white culture. Again, from a historical context, I think that people probably are somewhat aware of this, but you don't have any authority that talks about this. It's kind of a cryptic reference, and that's the only thing that gets anything close to a source citation on it. Everything else is kind of like asserted. And I'm not saying that these things didn't happen, but I'm saying if you want us to believe it happened, you need to cite it. The two examples that you cite that are contemporary, you do tell us the names of the people that are involved. But again, as an illustration, a simple example, you're making a big generalization about what the culture does based on some teacher in Texas. I think that's a huge inferential leap to be making, and you need to have a little bit more data to go along with it. All right, and you had a very clear summary. Thank you.